Well, hello and welcome to this special presentation on the topic of cybersecurity. Today we're focusing on the responsibilities that organizational leaders now have in meeting new digital security requirements. I'm Bill McColgan, and joining me for this roundtable discussion is Debbie Momont, President and CEO of Twin State Technologies, which specializes in communications strategy and infrastructure, as well as information technology and cybersecurity. Edward Golden, Director of Information Security Services, and Jennifer Allen, the firm's Preemptive Attack Strategies Manager, and welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So let's start a little bit, Debbie, with talking about this evolution in the C-level's responsibility. They can no longer just simply direct IT and security matters to an IT department. Because the C-level is now responsible in some way. How has that changed in recent years and been different from what it might have been in the 90s and early 2000s?
Severely. It's changed in a great way. Not everybody's practicing the way it should be today, but 5 or 10 years ago, it would be very common for a CFO or a CEO to, if you asked them anything about their IT environment, to say, you know, so-and-so handles that for us. And they would really not know where their data was, where their assets were, how they were secured, who had access to different files and that sort of thing. Fast forward to today with, you know, the breaches that have occurred that have had the most public exposure, such as Target. In the case of Target, there was actually C-levels that lost their job because they had such poor understanding of what was happening within their environment. Today, a C-level cannot just trust that their assets are being protected. They need to know that their assets are being protected. In order to know that your assets are being protected, you need to know what are your assets, what are the things within your organization that have value or importance for the sustainability of that organization and the people that live as a result of the income that they derive from the organization. So today, it is incumbent on the C-levels to know more. They cannot just give that responsibility off any longer.
So what are some examples, Jennifer, of what C-level, top-level executive management really needs to know about cybersecurity that perhaps they didn't need to know before?
Well, I would start with saying educate yourself. You know, find out what the current threat landscape looks like. Understand the terminology. I find a lot of organizational leaders don't understand the basics of what they need to protect themselves against. What you know, they don't even understand what's occurring on their network. And speaking to Debbie's point, it's becoming more of a responsibility for organizational leaders to be able to ensure that they do understand what resources they have to protect, what types of threats that they need to protect against, and what the risks are for their organization and the individuals within the organization. You know, they have a lot of employees that they need to protect. They have a lot of intellectual property. They tend to have quite a few resources in terms of devices, computers, you know, just everything in the digital realm. And these assets can become a risk point that can be exploited in ways that they may not be able to predict. So they really need to start by understanding what their risks are, what their organization looks like for people, processes, and the network resources. And beyond that, then they really need to start to get in touch with other organizational leaders who are going through the same thing. That would be one of my recommendations for a leader who doesn't know where to start, right? Find other organizations that are a little ahead of you in developing a strong, layered security program. And find out what they're doing, you know, what's working for them and what challenges they've already overcome. I would also stress that educating the individuals within the organization, those folks who have access to the resources on the network, who have access to sensitive data, and who have you know, accounts, email addresses, they are walking through doors that may be protected, making sure that those individuals understand the risk as well and know what to look for.
There's certainly nothing wrong with stealing some best practices.
Absolutely, right. They're best practices for a reason.
Right. Well, I've heard it sort of put in the terms of saying that it's the difference between being cybersecurity, having a cybersecurity awareness, as opposed to having a cybersecurity literacy of really truly understanding it.
And I wanted to make one point in regards to that is the security and the privacy aspect. What we find in the organizations where the C-level, in many cases the CEO, embraces it and has organizations come in and do training and create an awareness aspect for the individuals within the company. By virtue of each individual being more savvy, more secure, more aware of the privacy aspects, they create a more safe and secure and private ecosystem for the organization. So in cases where the C-level maintains a little bit of a lower level of understanding and appreciation of the risks that face us today that, quite honestly are totally different than 5 years ago, they're creating a huge risk for their organization. So I think today, I was just a few minutes ago heard a story about an organization that made their business managing membership lists and marketing to membership donors, and they got ransomware, and the ransomware they didn't pay the fine, so they had all these encrypted files that they didn't have access to. They lost all that intellectual property for that little business and they went bankrupt. So these things happen all the time. So we need to understand as C-levels, which I am one, where are my assets, who should have access to them and who should not, how long do I archive them, where do I keep them? If they're in the cloud, you are at the mercy of the security of that cloud provider. If you're in a data center, you're at mercy of the data center security. There's all sorts of things that people take for granted at the C-level that you just can't do anymore.
Ed, how can executive management and organizational leaders ensure that their own organization is compliant with these evolving security regulations so that they can avoid penalties?
Sure. Well, jumping in on what was already said, they need to adopt a culture of security, cybersecurity. It needs to be prevalent throughout the organization. Make sure that their employees are aware of what the threats are and how they should respond to them. They also need to make sure that they clearly delineate roles and responsibilities for the different security functions within the organization. If people know what they're responsible for, then they have a tendency to do it. If they don't know, obviously it doesn't get done. So that's very important. Also, they need to provide resources, for the security program. They need to make sure that the programs are funded and that they have the proper tools to do the job. One other thing I would add is that oftentimes certain organizations, like finance organizations, have to have regular audits that external agencies will come in and take a look and do testing and so forth. I would suggest to them that they do internal audits on their own to make sure that they're compliant, before the external folks even come in.
And the penalties can be severe.
Absolutely. Well, the penalty of going out of business is probably the worst one.
True.